15 engineers had scratched their heads for days. Blueprints were scattered across the floor like confetti, screens flashed with endless streams of code, and yet, the solution to a problem that could make or break the future of Nathan Blackwood's tech empire remained stubbornly out of reach. Nathan, a single dad and CEO of the world-renowned AI firm Blackwood Innovations, watched anxiously from his glass office. His fingers drummed on the mahogany desk, heart racing, not just because of the project's high stakes, but because today, for the first time in months, his 8-year-old daughter, Lily, had insisted on coming to the office. The engineers were sweating, mumbling about limitations and impossible algorithms. Each had spent hundreds of hours, some claiming this was beyond human capability, yet Nathan knew deep down it wasn't a lack of skill, it was a lack of perspective. Lily, however, had quietly set herself up in the corner with her sketchbook, doodling whimsical robots that seemed to dance across the pages. Nathan chuckled nervously. "Honey, this is serious work. Maybe stick to coloring." But Lily shook her head, eyes gleaming with curiosity, and whispered, "I can help." Nathan smiled politely, but the engineers collectively scoffed. One muttered under his breath, "What could a child possibly do here?" Moments later, an unexpected twist occurred. The nanny, Margaret, who had been silently tidying up near the coffee machine, leaned over the console. She had spent years caring for Nathan's home, balancing schedules, and orchestrating the chaos of raising a brilliant but stubborn child. And yet, she had a secret of her own. A mind sharpened by decades of puzzle-solving, logical games, and the kind of intuition engineers rarely admitted existed outside equations. She studied the problem, a frown crossing her face, then calmly picked up a pen. "Have you considered approaching it like this?" she asked, pointing at the code, rearranging a few variables in a pattern that seemed almost too simple. The room went silent. 30 seconds passed. And then, lights blinked, the system whirred, and a cascade of confirmations appeared on the main screen. It worked. The engineers' jaws dropped. They whispered to one another, disbelief etched on their faces. Nathan's own eyes widened. Margaret looked up, serene as ever, with a small, almost imperceptible shrug. "Sometimes, the simplest perspective is all it takes," she said. Nathan's heart swelled, not just with relief, but with a growing admiration. This wasn't just about technology. This was about humility, about recognizing brilliance where it's least expected. He realized that success wasn't always in high-profile degrees or years of experience. It was in insight, patience, and the quiet power of observation. As the engineers scrambled to understand what had just happened, Nathan stepped closer to Margaret, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You just saved the company," he said. His voice was low, filled with awe. "And somehow, I feel like you just saved me too." Margaret smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mix of amusement and wisdom. "Sometimes, Mr. Blackwood, the world doesn't need another engineer. It needs someone who notices what everyone else misses." Nathan glanced at Lily, who was grinning, doodle pad in hand. It struck him suddenly. She had been watching the entire time, absorbing every movement, every flicker of problem-solving energy. Perhaps this was a lesson that would shape more than one generation. Maybe brilliance wasn't only inherited from tech giants or elite schools, it was nurtured in kitchens, living rooms, and the quiet corners of imagination. Nathan's mind raced. Ideas flooded in. How to reward Margaret, how to rethink his approach to leadership, how to ensure his company never underestimated unconventional thinkers again. And yet, amid the corporate strategy and looming deadlines, a simpler thought stayed with him. Life's greatest solutions often appear in the most unassuming places. He turned back to the glowing screen and felt a surge of gratitude. He realized that the true magic wasn't in the technology. It was in the human touch, the kind that could turn failure into triumph in 30 seconds flat. Nathan leaned back, taking a deep breath. The challenge had been overcome, but he knew this moment was more than just a victory, it was a revelation. And he couldn't wait to see how far this newfound perspective would carry him, his company, and most importantly, his little daughter, who had already learned that sometimes, the world's biggest problems could be solved with the simplest insight. And yet, as the room buzzed with disbelief and excitement, Nathan felt an inkling of unease mixed with curiosity. Margaret's solution was elegant, flawless, but it hinted at something more, something that no one had yet realized. Nathan's mind raced as he stared at the screen, still glowing with the proof of Margaret's brilliance. It wasn't just the solution that intrigued him, it was the way she had approached the problem, almost intuitively, as if she had been reading the system itself. The engineers were still huddled together, muttering about overlooked protocols and hidden variables, but Nathan sensed there was more to this than mere technical skill. Margaret had tapped into something deeper, a kind of pattern recognition that defied conventional logic. "Margaret," he said, stepping closer, his voice firm but curious, "how did you?" "I mean, no one even considered this approach." She smiled, a gentle knowing curve of her lips. "Sometimes, Mr. Blackwood, the answers aren't in the code. They're in the way we interpret it. You've been teaching engineers to solve problems with rigid rules. I just asked the question differently." Nathan frowned thoughtfully. He had spent years building Blackwood Innovations into a fortress of logic, where only the best minds could thrive, yet here was a quiet, unassuming woman outpacing the entire team in 30 seconds. He felt a spark of both admiration and unease. The success was exhilarating, but it also exposed a vulnerability he hadn't considered. He looked over at Lily, who was perched on the edge of a chair, her small feet dangling, eyes wide with excitement. She had been silently observing the exchange, sketchpad abandoned, absorbed in the world of adults for the first time without complaint. Nathan realized, with a pang of both pride and protectiveness, that Lily had just witnessed a lesson that no textbook could teach, that brilliance could appear in the most unexpected forms. "Lily," he said softly, kneeling beside her, "did you understand what just happened?" She nodded vigorously. "I think she just made magic," she whispered, the words barely audible but filled with awe. Nathan chuckled. There was truth in her observation. Meanwhile, Margaret returned to her quiet tidying, as if nothing remarkable had happened. Nathan's mind, however, refused to quiet. Something about her calm composure nagged at him. He had always believed that success was built on measurable effort, but this had been instantaneous, effortless even, and yet undeniably correct. The question gnawed at him. How much of her brilliance was instinct, and how much was something he had never seen before? He excused himself from the engineers' cluster and followed Margaret into the narrow hallway that led to the break room. "I need to understand this," he said, his voice low. "Not just the solution, but the method." Margaret paused, turning to look at him, her eyes reflecting a depth of experience that words could barely capture. "Some methods," she said slowly, "aren't meant to be explained. They are discovered." Her gaze flicked briefly toward the office door where Lily was sketching quietly, then back to Nathan. "But if you're willing to look, you might see that this solution was the result of noticing what everyone else ignored." Nathan frowned, feeling both challenged and fascinated. Noticing what exactly? Margaret's lips curled into a faint smile, almost mischievous. "Patterns, tendencies, small inconsistencies that tell a bigger story. You've been training your engineers to solve problems in isolation, piece by piece. I solved it because I saw the problem as a living system." Nathan felt a shiver run down his spine. A living system. It was a concept he had read about in theoretical AI but had never truly understood, an idea that the whole might behave differently than the sum of its parts. And yet, here she was, turning theory into practice without so much as a blueprint. "What worries me," Nathan said slowly, "is that if you can do this in 30 seconds, what else have we been missing?" His voice was tinged with both awe and unease. Margaret's smile softened. "Everything, Mr. Blackwood, is always bigger than what we perceive. But sometimes, one insight is enough to change the course of everything." Nathan's gaze drifted back toward the office, where the engineers were still staring blankly at the screens, trying to reverse engineer the solution. Their frustration was palpable, but Nathan's mind was no longer on them. It was on Margaret, on Lily, and on the vast horizon of possibilities that had just opened. He felt an instinctive surge of urgency. This wasn't just a corporate breakthrough, it was a turning point in how he understood problem-solving, leadership, and even human potential. He realized that if he wanted Blackwood Innovations to stay ahead, he couldn't rely solely on conventional expertise anymore. He would have to embrace intuition, insight, and the unconventional brilliance that Margaret embodied. Nathan took a deep breath, his thoughts swirling. The adrenaline of success was still pulsing in his veins, but now it was accompanied by a profound awareness. The real challenge wasn't solving a single problem, it was learning to recognize where solutions might come from next. And perhaps, he thought, the most important lesson of all was this: genius is not always in the hands of those who claim it. Sometimes, it lives quietly, in the shadows, waiting for someone willing to notice. He turned back to the glowing screen, feeling a strange mix of relief, excitement, and anticipation. This was only the beginning. What Margaret had shown him, and the team, was not just a solution to a problem, but a doorway to a new way of thinking. A new standard. A new era for Blackwood innovations. And as Nathan watched Lily sketch her imaginary robots, he realized that the next revelation might not come from the boardroom, the lab, or even the engineers. It might come from the quietest, most unexpected observer in the room, someone willing to see what others couldn't. Nathan's thoughts swirled as he stared at the screen, the soft hum of servers filling the room like a pulse. He couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret's solution was only the surface of something far bigger. It wasn't just the simplicity of her approach, it was the foresight embedded in it. The kind of foresight that came not from technical manuals or university degrees, but from experience, observation, and an uncanny understanding of patterns. He glanced toward the engineers. Some had finally noticed the system's success, their faces a mixture of relief and disbelief. Yet a few were still muttering, clearly frustrated that their days of laborious calculations had been outpaced by a nanny with a lifetime of quiet problem-solving. Nathan realized that the problem now wasn't just the technical challenge, they were grappling with pride. And he couldn't blame them. He had spent years nurturing intellect, encouraging innovation, only to witness conventional expertise appended in 30 seconds. Nathan turned back to Margaret, who was quietly folding a pile of documents on the corner desk. Her calm demeanor made it almost impossible to gauge the depth of her mind, but Nathan knew one thing. This woman had unlocked something that no one else had. He needed to understand how, or at least, he needed to channel that insight for the company's next leap. Margaret, he said carefully, choosing his words, what you just did, it's extraordinary. But I feel like it's more than just solving this problem. There's a method, a way of seeing that we're missing. I need you to show me. She looked up at him, eyes twinkling with a mixture of amusement and caution. Show you? I'm not sure it's something that can be shown. It's a way of noticing what everyone else overlooks. A system isn't just numbers and codes, it's behavior, tendencies, interactions, a living entity, if you will. And the moment you see it as alive, patterns reveal themselves. Nathan leaned against the edge of his desk, intrigued and unsettled. A living system, he repeated. You mean it behaves unpredictably? Margaret smiled faintly. Not unpredictably. Purposefully. But only if you know how to observe it. She paused, glancing at Lily, who had wandered closer, curiosity written across her face. And sometimes, it takes someone who isn't constrained by expectations to notice those patterns. Nathan's pulse quickened. He realized, for the first time, that innovation wasn't purely about intelligence, it was about perception. Most of his engineers approached problems linearly, analyzing piece by piece, never stepping back to see the forest for the trees. Margaret hadn't just solved the problem. She had seen the forest, the interconnections, the hidden currents that guided the system. A sudden ping on one of the monitors snapped his attention back to the present. The system had flagged another anomaly, something subtle, almost imperceptible, but potentially catastrophic if ignored. He turned to the engineers. Do any of you understand this? They exchanged uneasy glances. It's strange, one admitted. We'd need days to trace it. Nathan shook his head. Margaret, he asked, almost instinctively. Margaret studied the screen, her expression unreadable. Then, without hesitation, she leaned in, her fingers moving with the same quiet decisiveness that had solved the original problem. She adjusted a few parameters, entered a series of subtle commands, and stepped back. 30 seconds later, the anomaly resolved itself. The system hummed smoothly, confirming the correction. Nathan's heart skipped a beat. He had just witnessed the impossible again. How? He began, but Margaret held up a hand. Observation, she said simply. Seeing what everyone else ignores. Understanding the flow of the system. Patterns don't lie, they are just waiting for someone to notice. Nathan's mind raced. If Margaret could do this twice in a row, what else could she do? Could she anticipate problems before they appeared? Could she teach his engineers to see the same way? And more importantly, could this perspective be applied beyond technology, into strategy, into leadership, into life itself? He felt a shift within himself. For years, he had defined success in measurable achievements, in efficiency, in technical brilliance. Yet here was a lesson in humility. Intelligence alone wasn't enough. Perspective, insight, and the courage to trust unconventional thinking were equally vital. Lily tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, she's like magic, she whispered. Nathan laughed softly, ruffling her hair, but inside, he knew this was more than childlike wonder. Margaret's method wasn't magic, it was profound insight, distilled into action so seamless it appeared effortless. Nathan glanced around the office. The engineers, once the sole architects of progress, now seemed almost secondary to this revelation. He felt a subtle tension rising, knowing some would resist, some would resent the disruption of hierarchy, and some would never understand the value of noticing the unnoticed. But he also recognized a rare opportunity to reshape the culture of Blackwood Innovations into something far more agile, perceptive, and powerful than he had ever imagined. As the day wore on, Nathan sat in his office, watching Margaret quietly interact with Lily, explaining small concepts with patience and clarity. A thought struck him. She wasn't just solving problems, she was teaching, modeling, and inspiring. The depth of her understanding extended beyond algorithms and into human intuition itself. He realized he had stumbled upon a rare gift, one that could transform not just his company, but the very way he approached challenges in life. Suddenly, a notification appeared on his tablet. An incoming call from a partner overseas, urgently requesting a solution to a crisis no one had yet managed to solve. Nathan looked at Margaret, then at Lily, and a slow smile spread across his face. This was no longer about a single problem, a single victory. This was about unlocking potential, seeing opportunity where others saw obstacles, and embracing the kind of brilliance that could appear in the most unassuming forms. And Nathan understood, with an electrifying certainty, that the world of Blackwood Innovations was about to change forever. Nathan sat back, heart still racing, as the gravity of the moment settled over him. The crisis notification on his tablet was urgent. An entire branch of Blackwood Innovations overseas had encountered a system-wide failure that threatened to derail months of research. Engineers had tried everything remotely, but nothing worked. Nathan's gaze drifted toward Margaret, who was quietly straightening papers on the desk. Her calm composure, so unassuming yet so commanding, contrasted sharply with the panic that threatened to rise in his own chest. "Margaret," he said, voice low, steady but filled with urgency, "I need you to handle this." She looked at him, a faint smile playing across her lips, as if she had anticipated this moment. "Do you want me to fix it?" Nathan nodded. "Exactly. And quickly. Time is critical." Without a word, she moved to his chair, examining the tablet with the same quiet intensity she had brought to the office earlier. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, complex and interwoven, yet her eyes traced patterns as if reading a story written in an alien language. Nathan watched, mesmerized, as fingers danced across the interface. He had never seen anyone interpret a problem with such intuitive precision. 30 seconds passed. Then, with a few keystrokes, the system stabilized. Notifications shifted from red to green, signaling that the crisis had been averted. Nathan exhaled slowly, unable to suppress a mixture of relief and disbelief. How did you do that?" he asked, awestruck. Margaret glanced at him calmly. "I noticed something the engineers missed. The system has a rhythm, a flow. Once you see the rhythm, the anomalies become obvious. They weren't bugs, they were reactions, predictable if you understand the interactions." Nathan shook his head, stunned. "You just saved millions and countless hours of work. And yet," he hesitated, searching for words, "you make it look effortless." Margaret shrugged, her expression gentle. "Effortless isn't the right word. I've been observing systems like this for decades, even before I worked here. Not everything has to be seen in rigid sequences. Sometimes, you step back, notice what's moving beneath the surface, and the solution appears." Nathan's mind was spinning. He had spent years cultivating top talent, building a hierarchy of brilliance, yet here was someone whose understanding was far beyond what degrees or accolades could measure. And now he realized it wasn't just skill, it was vision, insight, intuition. He turned toward Lily, who was perched on a chair, wide-eyed, having witnessed the entire sequence of events. The girl had seen brilliance in action, not as an abstract idea, but as a living, breathing force. "Daddy," Lily whispered, "she sees everything." Nathan nodded slowly, the weight of comprehension settling in. She did see everything. Margaret's brilliance wasn't just technical, it was holistic. She saw connections, patterns, and consequences that others ignored. And in that realization, Nathan sensed the true scope of what was happening. Blackwood Innovations had just discovered a force that could propel them far beyond the competition, if only he could harness it. A sudden idea struck him. He had been so focused on technology and data that he had ignored the human element, the intuition, the quiet observation, the unseen pattern recognition that Margaret exemplified. If he could integrate this perspective into his leadership, his projects, his engineers, the company wouldn't just solve problems, it would anticipate them, innovate ahead of time, and redefine the industry. Nathan turned toward Margaret, determination hardening his features. Margaret, I want you to stay on top of all critical projects. Not just to fix problems, but to guide the team. I want them to learn this way of seeing. Margaret's eyes sparkled with a subtle mix of surprise and amusement. Are you sure, Mr. Blackwood? That's a big responsibility. Nathan smiled. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. As Margaret nodded, Lily bounced slightly in her seat. Daddy, does this mean she's my superhero too? Nathan chuckled, ruffling Lily's hair. Yes, sweetheart. And maybe she's showing us all how to be heroes in our own way. But as the adrenaline faded, Nathan felt a creeping unease beneath the excitement. Margaret's insight was astonishing, but there was something else, something subtle he couldn't quite put his finger on. Her solutions were flawless, but their speed and precision hinted at a depth of understanding that might extend far beyond the projects she touched. What if her way of seeing revealed more than just technical anomalies? What if it could predict decisions, anticipate strategies, even foresee human behavior? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. Nathan forced himself to focus. Right now, the company needed solutions, not speculation. But the seed of curiosity had been planted. He realized that Margaret wasn't just a problem solver, she was a catalyst. And with her insight, Blackwood Innovations could ascend to heights he had never imagined. But with great power came uncertainty, and Nathan knew that harnessing this brilliance would require vigilance, trust, and perhaps a willingness to challenge everything he had believed about leadership, intelligence, and control. As the office slowly returned to normal, the engineers reluctantly returning to their workstations, Nathan remained standing, observing Margaret and Lily. The two of them moved with an ease and understanding that made him feel simultaneously grateful and apprehensive. He sensed that the next chapter for his company, and perhaps for his own life, was beginning. The question wasn't whether they could solve problems anymore. The question was, how far could they go before the insight revealed something even more extraordinary, or dangerous? Nathan exhaled, feeling both excitement and a tremor of caution. The world of Blackwood Innovations had changed forever, and he knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Every challenge, every decision, every innovation would now be filtered through the lens Margaret had revealed, a lens that saw beyond data, beyond logic, into the very heartbeat of systems, and perhaps, the heartbeat of people themselves. And as he watched her guide Lily through a simple puzzle, explaining patterns and consequences with quiet patience, Nathan realized that this was only the beginning. Margaret's insight had opened a door to a future that no one could have predicted. And for the first time in years, he felt truly ready to step through it. Nathan watched the office slowly settle, the hum of machines blending with the quiet chatter of engineers still trying to digest what had just happened. Margaret had returned to her corner, calmly organizing a few papers as if she hadn't just solved crises that had stumped the brightest minds in the company. Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, sketchbook in hand, eyes wide with awe and admiration. Nathan's chest swelled with a mix of pride, relief, and something far deeper, a profound realization that the world he thought he knew had just shifted. He walked over to Margaret, feeling the weight of the moment pressing against his chest. Margaret, he said, voice steady but tinged with emotion. Today, you've not only saved projects, you've changed everything I thought I knew about problem-solving, leadership, and life itself. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes calm, almost serene, as if she had expected this acknowledgement all along. Sometimes, Mr. Blackwood, she said quietly, it's not about knowing more, it's about noticing differently. Most people see the surface. Very few see the connections beneath it. And those who do, they change the world. Nathan nodded, his mind racing with the possibilities. He realized, with startling clarity, that this was more than a professional revelation. It was personal. His perspective on leadership, on intelligence, and on the potential of those around him had been forever altered. The old rules no longer applied. Success wasn't just about effort, credentials, or hierarchy. It was about insight, intuition, and the courage to trust the unexpected. He glanced at Lily, who had paused in her drawing to watch him intently. Her small face mirrored the excitement and curiosity that had been his constant companion since she was born. And in that moment, he understood something fundamental. Brilliance was contagious. Margaret's way of seeing the world had sparked something in Lily, and it had rekindled something within him as well, a renewed belief that solutions, innovation, and inspiration could come from the most unexpected places. Nathan turned back to the engineers, many of whom were still whispering in disbelief, trying to comprehend how a nanny could solve in 30 seconds what they had failed to accomplish in weeks. He realized that their astonishment, their frustration, and their admiration were all part of the lesson. Today was not just about Margaret. It was about humility, perspective, and the power of seeing differently. It was about understanding that genius does not always come with a title, a degree, or a reputation. Sometimes, it comes quietly, patiently, waiting for someone to notice. He walked to the front of the room, the soft tap of his shoes on the polished floor commanding attention. "Everyone," he said, voice calm but carrying authority, "today we've witnessed something extraordinary. We've seen that innovation is not only about technical skill, but about perspective, intuition, and the courage to approach problems in ways we never imagined. And we've learned that sometimes, the solution isn't in what we know, it's in what we notice." The engineers looked at him, wide-eyed, some still struggling to accept the shift in reality. Nathan allowed a small smile to cross his lips. "We are about to enter a new era at Blackwood Innovations. One where every challenge, every project, every decision is viewed through a lens that values insight as much as intellect. And we are fortunate, no, privileged, to have someone among us who embodies that vision." He gestured toward Margaret, who met his gaze calmly, almost shyly, yet with undeniable authority. Nathan took a deep breath, letting the magnitude of the day sink in. "This is not the end of a challenge," he continued, voice growing stronger, more determined. "It is the beginning of a journey where we will embrace the unexpected, trust intuition, and redefine what it means to solve problems. Today, we have learned that greatness can appear in any form, quietly, unexpectedly, and in ways that defy our expectations. And it is up to us to recognize it, nurture it, and allow it to guide us forward." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of his words settling like a tangible presence. Then, one by one, the engineers began to nod, some exchanging glances of awe and newfound respect. Nathan felt a surge of pride, not in his own leadership, but in the potential he saw awakening in those around him. Margaret had not only solved a problem, she had opened their eyes to a new way of thinking, a new standard of excellence. He turned back to Lily, crouching down so he could meet her eyes. "Do you see it now, sweetheart?" he asked softly. "Sometimes the smartest, most important solutions come from those who notice what everyone else misses." Lily nodded, her eyes sparkling, a mixture of wonder and determination in her gaze. Nathan realized that today's lesson was bigger than the office, bigger than the company. It was a lesson about life, vision, and the extraordinary possibilities that awaited those willing to look beyond the obvious. Nathan straightened, feeling a sense of clarity he hadn't known in years. He glanced once more at Margaret, then at his daughter, and finally at the engineers, who were slowly returning to their workstations with renewed focus and a fresh understanding of what true insight looked like. A profound sense of anticipation coursed through him. The future of Blackwood Innovations, and perhaps the world, was no longer defined solely by effort or expertise. It was defined by perception, by intuition, and by the courage to recognize brilliance wherever it appeared. And in that moment, Nathan understood something deep, simple, and powerful. The world was full of problems, but it was also full of solutions. Some hidden, some waiting, some quietly brilliant, and all waiting for someone brave enough to notice. As the office hummed with renewed energy, Nathan felt an exhilaration he had never known. He knew that with Margaret's guidance, Lily's curiosity, and a team ready to embrace a new way of thinking, the impossible would become routine, and the extraordinary would become expected. The sun dipped low against the horizon, casting a warm glow through the glass walls of the office. Nathan looked out, a quiet smile playing on his lips. The world was vast, full of challenges, yet also full of untapped potential. And today, he had glimpsed a truth that would guide him, his company, and his daughter for years to come. That greatness often comes from where we least expect it, and when it does, it has the power to change everything. For Nathan Blackwood, Margaret, and Lily, this was only the beginning, and the future had never looked more limitless.